single mother faces the terrible twins of the millionaire, and he never imagined what would come next. Hired as a caretaker, she brings her son along and decides to face the boys who have already chased away all previous nannies. What begins with provocations and traps turns into an emotional war full of tension and twists. But in the midst of chaos, a connection so strong is born that transforms not only the children, but the millionaire himself. If this story interests you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. We continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll ever hear in your life. The alarm clock rang at 5:30, but Emma had already been awake for at least an hour, staring at the peeling ceiling of the small bedroom. The bills spread across the kitchen table didn't add up to more than the overdue rent debt. And the eviction notice seemed to weigh a ton on her chest. She swallowed hard, feeling the knot in her throat that had become as familiar as the smell of mold on the walls. "Mom," the sweet voice of Ethan, her 8-year-old son, sounded from the half-open door. He was standing there in his faded superhero pajamas with his hair pointing in all directions. "I couldn't sleep well." Emma extended her arms, inviting him to lie beside her. She stroked the boy's hair while trying to hide the worry in her eyes. Ethan was too sensitive for his age, noticing every change in his mother's mood as if he were a small, emotional radar. "Today is the interview day, isn't it?" he asked, his eyes shining with hope. "Yes, my love, and we'll succeed, you'll see." She smiled, trying to convey a confidence she didn't completely feel. The newspaper ad seemed too good to be true. Caretaker wanted for 2 boys, above average. Salary, housing included. But there was a detail in smaller print that made her hesitate. All previous ones quit. After preparing a weak coffee and a buttered toast for her son, Emma put on her only formal outfit, a black pencil skirt and a starched white blouse that she kept for special occasions. She combed her brown hair, applied a discreet lipstick, and faced her reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror. At 32, her face already showed expression lines around her eyes, silent scars from sleepless nights and accumulated worries. The journey to the mansion in the city's upscale neighborhood seemed endless. Ethan would stay at school until noon, and the neighbor, Mrs. Caldwell, would pick up the boy if the interview went on longer than expected. As the bus traveled through the streets, Emma mentally reviewed her improvised resume. A few months as a daycare assistant, 3 years as a nanny for a family that moved abroad, and an incomplete psychology degree, abandoned in the 3rd year when she discovered her unplanned pregnancy. When she finally arrived at the indicated address, Emma felt her stomach sink. The house, or rather the mansion, commanded respect with its 3 floors, well-maintained gardens, and an imposing entrance protected by a tall iron gate. She took a deep breath, adjusted her posture, and rang the intercom. "Good morning, I'm Emma Jensen. I have a scheduled interview with Mr. Richard Anderson." The gate opened with an electronic buzz inviting her in. The polished stone path to the main door was lined with perfect rose bushes, so different from the dried plants she kept in recycled cans in her apartment. Each step increased her feeling of not belonging. The door was opened by a middle-aged woman dressed in a discreet uniform. "I'm Ruth, the housekeeper. Mr. Anderson is waiting for you in his office." Her tone was neutral, but Emma caught a quick evaluating look, the kind that catalogues every imperfection in seconds. The interior of the house was even more impressive. Marble flooring, artwork on the walls, furniture that seemed never to have been used. Everything there screamed order, discipline, and absence of chaos, the complete opposite of the apartment where she raised Ethan among scattered toys and time-worn furniture. Upon entering the office, Emma found herself facing a man of approximately 40, with graying hair at the temples and a penetrating gaze. Richard Anderson didn't stand up to receive her, merely indicating the chair in front of him with a contained gesture. "Ms. Jensen, let's get straight to the point. I need someone to take care of my sons, Aaron and Adam, 10-year-old twins. It's not a simple job. He hesitated, choosing his words. "Let's say they're special children, intelligent but difficult. The last 5 caretakers didn't last more than a month." Emma swallowed hard. "May I ask the reason for their resignations?" An almost imperceptible smile passed across the man's lips. "Elaborate pranks, resistance to rules, some small traps, nothing dangerous, just exhausting. My sons lost their mother 3 years ago and since then seem determined to drive away any female figure who gets close." The silence weighed between them for a few seconds. Emma knew she should feel intimidated, perhaps even reconsider the proposal, but something in that situation awakened her protective instinct. Difficult children were usually just wounded children. "Mr. Anderson, I have one condition for accepting the job," said Emma, surprising herself with her sudden courage. "I have an 8-year-old son, Ethan. I'll need to bring him with me." The man raised his eyebrows, visibly surprised by her boldness. "This wasn't in the plans, Ms. Jensen. An external element could complicate the situation even more. Or it could be exactly what your sons need. A child who doesn't judge them, who doesn't come with expectations. Just another boy to share the space." Emma maintained a firm gaze, though her heart beat erratically in her chest. It was a calculated risk, but she couldn't leave Ethan behind, not after all the promises she had made that they would never be separated. Richard leaned forward, studying her more carefully. "Psychology, incomplete 3rd year," he murmured, looking at the resume on the desk. "Are you using academic knowledge to analyze my sons, Ms. Jensen?" "I'm using my experience as a mother to understand what children need, Mr. Anderson." Something in the air changed, a different tension, almost like recognition. Finally, he nodded slowly. "We'll give a trial period, 1 month. If my sons don't accept your son's presence, we'll have to reconsider the arrangement." Before Emma could respond, the office door burst open and 2 identical boys entered. Dark brown hair, perfectly combed, intense blue eyes, and indecipherable expressions. They wore impeccable school uniforms and carried identical backpacks. "Dad, we need your signature for next week's field trip," said one of them, completely ignoring Emma's presence. "And Ruth said you wanted to see us after school," added the other, finally casting a sidelong glance at the visitor. Richard stood up, suddenly tense. "Aaron, Adam, this is Ms. Emma. She will be your new caretaker." The twins turned in unison, staring at Emma with a cold curiosity that sent chills down her spine. There was no explicit hostility, just a silent and calculated assessment, as if they were already planning something. "How long will this one stay?" asked one of them, with a disturbing calmness for a 10-year-old child. "Long enough," Richard answered in a warning tone. "Miss Emma and her son, Ethan, will come to live with us starting tomorrow." The twins' eyes widened slightly at the mention of another child. They exchanged a quick glance, a silent communication that seemed to dispense with words. "A son?" repeated one of them, whom Emma presumed to be Aaron from the initial discreetly embroidered on his backpack. "Interesting." "Very interesting," echoed Adam, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. At that moment, Emma felt a pang of apprehension. What had started as an opportunity for survival was beginning to feel like an endurance test. But looking at those boys, so perfectly composed on the outside and so visibly broken on the inside, she knew she couldn't back down. "Tomorrow at 9, then," said Richard, extending his hand to seal the deal. "Ruth will show you your quarters and your sons." As she followed the housekeeper through the silent corridors of the mansion, Emma tried to ignore the feeling of being watched. In a hallway mirror, she caught the reflection of the twins standing at the top of the stairs, following her every step with a disturbing interest. The move happened with the swiftness of a feverish dream. In one morning, Emma and Ethan packed their few possessions into 3 cardboard boxes and 2 worn suitcases. By noon, they were already installed in a small apartment attached to the Anderson mansion, a space that, although modest compared to the main house, seemed like a palace compared to the cubicle they had left behind. "Mom, it's like we're princes," exclaimed Ethan, running from one side to the other, discovering the room with a new bed, the soft sheets, the gleaming bathroom, and the small living room with a television larger than they had ever had. Emma smiled, trying to contain the emotion of seeing her son so amazed. Throughout her life, She had struggled to give Ethan the minimum, carrying the weight of guilt for not being able to offer more. Now for a brief moment she allowed herself to believe that perhaps things could finally improve. Ruth appeared at the door at 2 o'clock, with her usual austere countenance. "Mr. Anderson would like you to join the family for a late lunch. The boys have just returned from swimming." Emma nodded, nervously adjusting the simple dress she had chosen for the first day. She crouched in front of Ethan, adjusting the collar of his new shirt, bought especially for the occasion with the last money they had. "Remember what we talked about, my love. We need to make a good impression." Ethan, with the wisdom that sometimes surprised in an 8-year-old child, took his mother's hands in his. "Everything will be fine, Mum. I'll behave. And I'll make friends with the twins, you'll see." The Andersons' dining room was intimidating, with its dark wooden table that could easily seat 12 people, crystal chandeliers, and an entire wall of windows that opened onto the impeccable garden. Richard was seated at the head, with the twins strategically positioned one on each side. All three raised their eyes when Emma and Ethan entered, creating a feeling of a silent tribunal. "Please sit down," indicated Richard with the formality that seemed to characterize all his interactions. Ethan, unlike Emma, didn't seem intimidated. He approached the table with determined steps and smiled openly at the twins. "Hi, I'm Ethan. You're Aaron and Adam, right? How do you know who's who? You're identical." An awkward silence followed the boys' enthusiastic questions. The twins exchanged quick glances, apparently disconcerted by the direct and warm approach. "I'm Aaron," finally said one of them, with a neutral voice. "My brother and I know very well who we are, even if others get confused. And we prefer to keep it that way," added Adam, with the same distant tone. Ethan, however, seemed immune to the coldness. He sat animatedly in the empty chair next to Adam and continued. "At my old school there were twins too, but they weren't identical like you. One had a mole on his chin. Do you have anything different from each other?" Before the twins could answer or ignore the question, Ruth entered with the food plates. Lunch proceeded in a silence punctuated only by occasional observations from Richard about the weather, or practical questions about Emma and Ethan's adaptation to their new quarters. The twins ate methodically, without raising their eyes from their plates, but Emma noticed that from time to time they cast furtive glances at Ethan, who was devouring the meal with enthusiasm, having never tasted such elaborate food. "What's for dessert?" Ethan innocently asked, when the main plates were removed. "We don't have dessert on weekdays," Richard replied firmly. "It's a house rule." Ethan's face visibly wilted, and Emma felt that familiar pang in her heart, the pain of seeing her son being deprived of something, even something as simple as a dessert. "I think I have a chocolate in my backpack," whispered Ethan to Adam, leaning in conspiracy. "We can share it later if you want." The twin slightly widened his eyes as if he didn't understand the concept of sharing something with a stranger. His brother on the other side of the table seemed equally perplexed. After lunch, Richard announced that he would have a video conference and retreated to his office, leaving Emma to establish the first routine with the boys. "How about we get to know the house?" she suggested, trying to sound excited and confident. "Ethan and I still haven't seen everything, and you could be our guides." "We have homework," Aaron replied dryly. "And piano at 4, added Adam. Emma nodded, trying not to show her disappointment. "I understand. Maybe later then. Where do you usually do your homework?" "In the library," replied Aaron, "alone." The twins stood up in perfect synchrony and headed for the exit of the dining room. At the last moment, Adam turned slightly. "You can come if you want," he said, looking not at Emma but at Ethan. It was the first ray of hope, thin, hesitant but present. Ethan looked at his mother, silently asking for permission. "Go ahead," encouraged Emma. "I'll organize our things in the meantime." As she watched her son follow the twins down the corridor, Emma felt a mixture of apprehension and relief. Perhaps Ethan was the key to breaking the ice with those boys, who seemed to have built emotional fortresses around themselves. The following hours were of a disturbing quietness. Emma arranged the clothes in the wardrobes, organized Ethan's school materials, and familiarized herself with the kitchen, where she would prepare the children's snacks according to Ruth's guidelines. The housekeeper seemed omnipresent, silently appearing to verify if Emma understood all the house rules, strict schedules, restricted areas, behavioral expectations. At 5:30, when the sky was beginning to darken, Emma went to the library to look for the boys. The door was ajar, and she stopped for a moment, observing the scene through the crack. Ethan was sitting between the twins, showing something in a notebook, speaking animatedly while the other two listened with expressions that oscillated between curiosity and distrust. "So that's how the teacher taught us to remember the 9 times table," Ethan was saying, tracing something on the paper. "See how cool it is." Emma hesitated, not wanting to interrupt that precious moment. She decided to back away, giving the boys a few more minutes together when she heard a sound that paralyzed her. A laugh. Brief, contained, but unmistakably a laugh from one of the twins. That night, when Ethan was already sleeping, exhausted after the busy day, Emma flipped through her old psychology college notebook. The notes on child development, trauma, and attachment seemed to whisper strategies for reaching those boys isolated in their pain. A light knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. It was Richard, still in formal attire despite the late hour. "May I come in?" he asked with a formality that seemed never to leave him. Emma nodded, quickly closing the notebook and indicating the small sofa in the living room. She suddenly became conscious of the simplicity of her nightgown and the worn robe she was wearing. "I came to check how the first day went," said Richard, staying rigidly on the edge of the sofa. "Ruth informed me that your son accompanied mine in the library. Yes, Ethan has a knack for making friends. He is naturally affectionate." Emma hesitated before adding, "Something your sons might not be used to." A flash of irritation passed through Richard's eyes. "Are you analyzing my parenting methods, Ms. Jensen?" "Not at all," replied Emma, keeping her voice calm. "Just observing. It's what I do. I observe to understand before acting." The silence that followed was charged with a strange tension. It wasn't exactly hostility, but a kind of mutual recognition. 2 adults responsible for vulnerable children, cautiously evaluating each other. "My sons lost their mother in complicated circumstances," Richard finally said with a lower "Fiat? She didn't pass away. She abandoned them. She chose to leave." The revelation hit Emma like a punch. Suddenly, the coldness of the twins, their resistance to any female figure, made painful sense. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "Don't be," retorted Richard, recovering his rigid posture. "Heather was unstable, unpredictable. Maybe it was better this way. But the children—" He paused, and for a brief moment the mask of absolute control seemed to crack. "They don't understand. They think they did something wrong, that they weren't enough." Emma felt a knot in her throat. "Children always assume the blame," she said softly, thinking of Ethan and the time she had caught him looking at the door, waiting for the father who would never return. "It's our responsibility to show them that the problem was never with them." Richard raised his eyes, staring at her with a disconcerting intensity. "That's exactly why you're here, Ms. Jensen. Not just to supervise lessons or prepare snacks, but to help them," he seemed to search for the right word, "heal." Before Emma could respond, a sharp scream cut through the silence of the night. "Ethan!" she exclaimed, jumping up and running to her son's room. The boy was sitting up in bed with his eyes wide with terror. "Mom, there was someone looking at me. At the window." Richard appeared right behind Emma, tense. "Impossible. We're on the poor second floor." Emma turned on the bedside lamp and approached the window, opening the curtains. There was nothing beyond the darkness of the night and their own reflection in the glass. "It was just a nightmare, my love," she said, sitting on the edge of the bed and hugging her trembling son. "It wasn't a dream," insisted Ethan with a choked voice. "I saw 2 identical faces looking at me." The following days brought a routine that alternated between moments of tension and small victories. Emma woke before dawn, prepared herself carefully, and organized the children's breakfast according to Ruth's meticulous instructions. The twins appeared punctually at 7, always impeccable in their uniforms, while Ethan still struggled with the buttons of his shirt and tried to tame his rebellious hair. The mornings followed a rigid script: breakfast in silence, checking the backpacks, departure for school in the car driven by the family's private chauffeur. Emma took advantage of the mornings to organize the day's tasks and study the habits of the house, trying to find cracks in that seemingly unshakable structure. It was on the fourth day that Emma discovered, by chance, the room that had belonged to the twins' mother. She was exploring the third-floor corridor, an area that Ruth had mentioned was rarely used, when she found a half-open door. Inside, a feminine room frozen in time, perfumes still on the dressing table, clothes in the closet, photographs on the bedside table. Heather Anderson smiled in all of them, a stunning woman with blonde hair and intense blue eyes, the same as the twins. In none of the photos, however, did she appear with the children. "What are you doing here?" Richard's voice startled Emma, who almost dropped the photo frame she was holding. "I'm sorry, I was exploring the house to familiarize myself, and the door was open." Emma felt her face burn with shame, like a child caught in the act. Richard remained at the threshold. Without entering the room, his gaze traversed the environment as if seeing a minefield. This place should be locked. "Why keep it intact?" asked Emma, risking provoking the boss's anger. "It seems like a sanctuary." "It's not a sanctuary," he replied with bitterness. "It's a reminder. For me, not for the boys. They don't come here." Emma returned the photograph to the exact place where she had found it. "A reminder of what, exactly?" Richard hesitated, as if weighing how much he could or should reveal. "Of the mistake I made by bringing someone like Heather into our lives, of how much it cost all of us." Before the conversation could continue, Richard's cell phone rang, a work call that required immediate attention. With a last loaded look at the room, he walked away, leaving Emma alone with her unanswered questions. In the afternoon, when the children returned from school, Emma noticed a subtle change in the twins' behavior. They seemed less hostile, more observant. Instead of immediately isolating themselves in the library, they remained in the living room, apparently absorbed in their tablets, but clearly attentive to every movement of Ethan, who was animatedly drawing on the floor. "What are you doing?" Erin finally asked, breaking the silence. Ethan looked up, surprised and happy with the interest. "A treasure map. Want to see?" The twins exchanged quick glances before Erin cautiously approached, as if expecting a trap. Adam followed his brother, maintaining a safe distance. "This is the garden of the house," explained Ethan, pointing to his colorful drawing, "and here is where I think a treasure could be hidden. Every big old house has a secret. My grandma always said that." "Our house doesn't have treasures," affirmed Adam with certainty. "We've already explored every inch of it." Ethan smiled, undaunted. "Then can you help me explore the garden? I'm sure there are many secret places out there." Again, that silent communication between the twins, a language of looks and minimal gestures that dispensed with words. Emma, discreetly observing from the kitchen while preparing the afternoon snack, held her breath. "We can go to the garden after the snack," Aaron finally conceded, with a tone that tried to sound indifferent but couldn't completely hide a hint of childish curiosity. The Andersons' garden was vast and meticulously maintained, with different areas that included a small woods, a maze of low shrubs, and an ornamental fountain. Emma accompanied the children, keeping at a distance that allowed supervision without interfering with the interaction. It was the first time she saw the twins acting like normal 10-year-old children, running between the trees, showing Ethan their favorite hiding spots, competing to see who could climb higher on the lowest branches of an ancient oak. Ethan followed them with evident admiration, delighted to have finally broken the ice barrier that separated them. The most surprising transformation, however, occurred when they reached the pool area, an elegant structure of crystal-clear water, surrounded by lounge chairs and a small support house. "Do you know how to swim?" asked Ethan, looking fascinated at the water. "Of course," replied Adam with a touch of pride. "We have classes 3 times a week. Our father says every man should know how to swim." "I never learned," confessed Ethan with a sigh. "In my neighborhood, there was no pool and the beach was too far away." The twins exchanged glances again, but this time there was something different, an expression that Emma couldn't completely decipher. "We can teach you," offered Aaron, surprising both Emma and his brother. "It's not that hard." "Now?" Ethan practically jumped with enthusiasm. "Not now," intervened Emma, approaching. "We need your father's authorization first, and appropriate equipment for Ethan." A flash of disappointment passed through the eyes of all three children, but Emma remained firm. On the way back to the house, however, she noticed something unusual. The twins were walking one on each side of Ethan, animatedly conversing about swimming techniques and how fun it was to dive to the bottom of the pool. That night, after Ethan was already asleep, Emma received a message on her cell phone. It was a notification from a job interview she had done weeks before when her situation was desperate. A position as an administrative assistant in a psychological clinic, better salary than the current one, health insurance, possibility of resuming studies with a partial scholarship. Sitting in the small living room of the attached apartment, Emma stared at the cell phone screen for long minutes. 3 weeks ago, that message would have seemed like a miracle, the answer to all her prayers. Now it caused an inexplicable tightness in her chest. A light knock on the door interrupted her conflicting thoughts. It was Richard, with a folder of documents in his hands. "Sorry for the hour," he said with his usual formality, although something in his posture seemed less rigid than in previous days. "I needed to discuss some practical matters about the children." Emma indicated the sofa, quickly putting the cell phone in her pocket. For the next half hour, they discussed the twins' study routine, their extracurricular activities, and some behavioral particularities that Richard thought important to highlight. Aaron tends to assume the protector role, even being the youngest. "By 7 minutes," explained Richard with a rare smile. "Adam is more sensitive, although he tries to hide it at all costs." "I noticed they have their own form of communication," commented Emma. "They almost don't need words between them." Richard nodded with a distant look. "It's always been that way since they were babies. Sometimes I think they created this particular world to protect themselves from the chaos that surrounded them." "The chaos caused by their mother," risked Emma, knowing she was stepping on delicate ground. A heavy silence settled between them. Richard slowly closed the folder, as if gaining time to organize his thoughts. "Heather was fascinating, stunning. The type of woman who lights up a room just with her presence," he began with a lower voice. "But she was also unpredictable, unstable, demanding. The boys never knew which version of their mother they would encounter, the loving and playful one or the irritable and distant one." Emma listened attentively without interrupting. She hated routine responsibility. She said she felt suffocated by motherhood, that she had lost her identity. Richard ran his hand through his hair, a rare gesture of vulnerability. "I tried to compensate, to be both father and mother, to give stability. But it wasn't enough. Nothing was enough for Heather." "When did she leave?" Emma asked softly. "After a particularly ugly argument. The boys were 7 years old. They were in their room, but I'm sure they heard everything." Richard stared at his own hands. "She screamed that she wasn't made to be a mother, that it had been a mistake to keep the pregnancy. She grabbed some clothes and left. She didn't say goodbye to her sons." Emma's heart tightened, imagining the trauma of those children, hearing their own mother deny their existence. They never saw her again? "She tried to come back about 6 months later. She showed up here full of presents, swearing she had changed, that she missed the little ones." The contempt was evident in Richard's voice, but I realized it was just another of her whims. When the children didn't respond to her enthusiasm, when she realized it would be difficult, she simply gave up again. That was the last time. The revelation hung between them like a heavy cloud. So many things made sense now. The twins' distrust, their fear of becoming attached, Richard's rigidity, his fear of making the same mistake again. "That's why they test every caretaker," concluded Emma. "They want to prove that no woman is reliable, that all will eventually leave." Richard nodded slowly. "But your son seems to be breaking that pattern. Today, for the first time in years, I saw my sons acting like normal children in the garden. Ethan. Has that effect on people? Smiled Emma, feeling a warm pride. He sees the best in everyone without judgments or expectations. A rare quality, commented Richard, with a look that seemed to penetrate beyond Emma's defenses. I should thank you for bringing him to this house. When Richard finally said goodbye, it was already past midnight. Emma remained awake for some time, divided between the relief of better understanding the situation and the concern with what was to come. The cell phone weighed in her pocket, the clinic's message still unanswered. As she lay down, Emma didn't notice the silhouette that quickly moved away from Ethan's bedroom window. Not one but two identical figures, moving in perfect synchrony through the darkness of the garden. Saturday morning dawned sunny, with an almost impossible blue sky. Emma woke to the sound of children's laughter coming from the garden, a sound that, until then, was rare in that house. From her bedroom window, she saw Ethan running across the lawn, closely followed by the twins. Aaron was carrying a soccer ball and Adam was animatedly gesturing, explaining something that made the other two laugh. Observing that scene, Emma felt an almost overwhelming wave of emotion. In just 2 weeks, her son had accomplished what no adult had managed in years, breaking the emotional barriers of the Anderson twins. After breakfast, Richard surprised everyone by announcing that they would spend the day at the family's country house, an hour's drive from the city. The children need fresh air, and we need a break from routine, he declared, with a rare smile that softened his usually tense features. Ethan's excitement was contagious. Throughout the journey in the spacious car, he bombarded the twins with questions about the country house, if there were animals, if they could swim in the lake that Aaron had casually mentioned. There are huge fish, explained Adam, gesturing to indicate the exaggerated size. And once Aaron almost caught a turtle with his hands. It wasn't a turtle, it was a giant frog, corrected Aaron, with a laugh that surprised even Richard, who was observing the interaction through the rearview mirror. The Andersons' country house was a rustic but elegant construction, surrounded by leafy trees and with a crystal-clear lake a few meters away. As soon as they arrived, the children dashed towards the water, followed by Emma, who carried sunscreen and hats, concerned about the strong sun. They seem like normal children today, commented Richard, approaching Emma as they watched the boys playing at the edge of the lake, throwing pebbles to see who could make them skip more times on the water's surface. They always were normal children, Emma replied softly. Just wounded, scared. Richard observed her with that intensity that had become familiar in the last few weeks, a look that seemed to see beyond words, that sought to understand the intentions behind them. How do you do this? He finally asked. How do you manage to see beyond appearances so easily? Emma smiled thoughtfully. Maybe because I myself needed to be seen beyond appearances many times. A single mother, a university student who abandoned her course, always judged for choices that weren't always really choices. The confession hung between them, creating a moment of mutual understanding that transcended the formal relationship. Between employer and employee, something was changing, an invisible barrier being gradually dissolved with each conversation, with each look that lasted a second longer than necessary. The moment was interrupted by enthusiastic shouts from the children. The twins had convinced Ethan to enter the shallow water of the lake, holding his hands as he took his first hesitant steps in the water. Can I swim here? Asked Ethan, with his eyes shining with excitement. It's shallower than the pool, isn't? Taistim, yes, but you need to be careful, warned Emma, approaching the edge. And you two, she addressed the twins, are responsible for your friend, understood? The twins solemnly nodded, assuming the responsibility with an almost comical seriousness on their childish faces. For the next hour, Emma watched in amazement as Aaron and Adam patiently taught Ethan how to float, how to move his arms correctly, how to hold his breath underwater. Richard eventually joined them, demonstrating swimming techniques with a casualness that Emma had never witnessed before. It was a perfect day. Lunch outdoors, improvised games, stories shared under the shade of a centennial tree. When the sun began to set, tinting the sky with orange hues, Emma felt a pang of melancholy, thinking that they would need to return to the formality of the mansion. On the journey back, the children fell asleep in the back seat, exhausted by the games and the sun. Ethan was in the middle, with his head resting on Adam's shoulder, while Aaron leaned against the window, his hand lightly resting on the younger friend's arm, a protective gesture that didn't go unnoticed by Emma. "Thank you for today," said Richard in a low voice, so as not to wake the boys. "I don't remember the last time I saw my sons so light." "They just needed permission to be children," replied Emma. "Permission to trust, to become attached without fear." The silence that followed was comfortable, filled only by the peaceful breathing of the children and the soft sound of the engine. When Richard spoke again, his voice had a different quality, lower, more vulnerable. "Heather called me yesterday." Emma turned to him, surprised by the sudden revelation. "She's coming back to the city," continued Richard, with his eyes fixed on the road. "She said she wants to see the boys, that she misses them." Emma's heart accelerated with apprehension. "And what did you answer?" "That I won't allow her to hurt them again," he said firmly. "But legally she still has rights. I can't completely prevent her." Emma thought about the twins, how they were finally beginning to lower their defenses, to trust, to allow themselves to be just children. The idea of seeing them hurt again, abandoned, was unbearable. "Do the boys know?" she asked. "Not yet. I don't know how to tell them." That night, after the children went to bed, Emma sat on the small veranda of her attached apartment, contemplating the stars and the decision she needed to make. The email from the psychological clinic still awaited a response, an opportunity to resume her career, to finally use the knowledge she had fought so hard for. But how could she leave now? How could she leave Ethan, who had finally found friends, a sense of belonging? How could she abandon the twins at the moment they would most need stability, with the shadow of the absent mother looming over them again? As if summoned by her thoughts, Richard appeared in the garden, walking slowly towards the veranda. He was wearing casual clothes, a rare sight, and carried 2 glasses and a bottle of wine. "I thought you might need company," he said, with a hesitant smile. "And a drink." Sitting side by side on the small veranda, under the starry sky, they talked like never before, without barriers, without defined roles of employer and employee. They talked about interrupted dreams, about fears and hopes, about the children and the uncertain future. "I received a job offer," Emma finally confessed after the second glass of wine, "at a psychological clinic. I could resume my studies, finish my education." Richard remained silent for a few moments, his face illegible in the dimness. "Are you going to accept it?" he finally asked, with a controlled voice. "It would be the right thing to do, professionally speaking," replied Emma, staring at the glass in her hands. But I can't imagine leaving the boys now. Not just Ethan, who loves being here, but Aaron and Adam too. They're just beginning to trust, to open up." Emma raised her eyes, meeting Richard's intense gaze. "How could I abandon them at the moment Heather reappears? It would be repeating the same pattern that hurt them so much." Richard slowly extended, his hand gently touching Emma's fingers. The contact, although light, sent an electric current through her skin. "What if you didn't have to choose?" he asked with a lower voice. "What if you could have both, your career and this family we're building?" Before Emma could fully process the meaning of those words, a sharp scream cut through the night, followed by the sound of glass breaking. Both jumped up, running towards the main house. The twins' room was in chaos, a broken photo frame on the floor, Aaron standing by the window with an expression of fury, Adam sitting on the bed with his face in his hands, and in the center of the room, elegant as always in her expensive dress, was Heather Anderson. "What does this mean?" demanded Richard, his voice trembling with contained anger. "How did you get in here?" Heather smiled, that dazzling smile that had certainly conquered Richard years ago. "Ruth always liked me, dear. Some people still remember who the true owner of this house is." Her blue eyes, identical to her son's, rested on Emma, evaluating her from head to toe with barely disguised disdain. "And you must be the new nanny, or something more apparently?" Her eyes caught the abandoned wine glasses on the veranda. Get out of my house, ordered Richard, positioning himself between Heather and the boys. Right now, or I'll call the police. Your house? Heather laughed, a sound both musical and cold. Don't be ridiculous, Richard. I'm here to see my sons. I have that right. Right? Aaron's voice surprised everyone, loaded with a raw emotion that tore through the air. What right do you have? You left us. You said you didn't want us. Heather advanced towards her son, but Aaron backed away, positioning himself next to his brother, who remained silent, visibly trembling. Darling, you don't understand. Mommy was sick, confused. But now I'm better. I came to get you for us to spend the weekend together, as a family. It was Adam who responded this time, raising his face wet with tears. We already have a family. The silence that followed was almost palpable. Heather looked around, noticing the subtle changes in the boys' room. New photographs on the walls, colorful drawings obviously made by Ethan, small signs of a life that had moved forward without her. I see you replaced me quickly, she said, with barely disguised bitterness. The little employee and her bastard son took my place. How convenient. Enough, Richard's voice cut through the air like a whip. You lost the right to say anything about this family the moment you chose to. Abandon it. Leave now, Heather. At that moment, Ethan appeared at the door of the room, rubbing his sleepy eyes. Aaron? Adam? Is everything okay? The twins moved instantly to their friend's side, forming a protective barrier between him and the unknown woman. It was such a sincere, so instinctive gesture that Emma felt her eyes fill with tears. Heather observed the scene with a stunned expression, as if finally understanding that there was no longer a place for her there. Without further words, she turned and left, her elegant steps echoing down the silent corridor. The following hours were dedicated to calming the children, reassuring the twins that they were safe, that no one would take them against their will. Ethan, with his natural empathy, lay down between the twins on one of the beds, holding their hands until they all fell asleep, exhausted by the emotional turmoil. When they finally returned to the attached apartment, it was already past 3 in the morning. Richard seemed aged 10 years, the weight of the confrontation visible in every line of his face. She won't give up easily, he said, sitting heavily on the sofa. Heather has always been obstinate when she wanted something. But why now? Questioned Emma, sitting beside him. After all this time? Richard sighed deeply. Ruth mentioned that she saw Heather with an older man recently. Rich, influential. Perhaps she wants to impress him, show that she's a dedicated mother. Or maybe she realized what she lost, Emma suggested softly. Sometimes we only value what we had when we see others lovingly caring for what we abandoned. Richard turned to her with an expression of vulnerability he had never shown before. How did the boys have the luck to find you, Emma? How did I have that luck? It wasn't clear who moved first, perhaps both simultaneously, recognizing what had been silently growing between them in the last few weeks. The kiss was gentle, hesitant at first, like a question being asked, and then deeper, an answer being given. When they separated, Emma rested her forehead on Richard's shoulder, feeling her heart beating erratically in her chest. This complicates everything, she murmured. Or simplifies it, he replied, caressing her hair. Stay, not just as the boy's caretaker, but as part of this family. You and Ethan belong here, with us. In the weeks that followed, Heather tried various approaches, expensive gifts sent to the boys, invitations for extravagant outings, even an attempt to take Ethan from school, claiming to be a distant relative. This last one moved Richard to take legal measures, obtaining a temporary restraining order. The legal battle was exhausting, but revealing. During the hearings, it became clear that Heather wasn't really seeking reconnection with her sons. She only wanted the image of a perfect mother to impress her new partner, a rising politician who valued the traditional family for his public image. The twins, with surprising maturity for their age, testified that they preferred to remain with their father. The judge, sensitive to the children's trauma, determined that any contact with the mother should be supervised, and only if the boys wished. It was during this turbulent period that Emma made her decision about the job at the clinic. After a long conversation with Richard, they found a solution that seemed impossible weeks before. She would accept the job part-time, continue living on the Andersons' property, and resume her studies in psychology. She wouldn't be the twins' official caretaker. They would hire someone for that, but would remain a constant and loving presence in their lives. The transformation in the family dynamics was gradual but profound. The twins began to have separate rooms by their own choice, an affirmation of their newly discovered individualities. Aaron developed an interest in astronomy, while Adam revealed a talent for music, differences that were now celebrated, not suppressed. Ethan flourished in the new environment, making friends at the prestigious school to which he was transferred, but always maintaining that natural kindness that characterized him. It was he who found the injured bird in the garden during a rainy autumn afternoon. "Can we take care of it?" he asked, with the small being trembling in his cupped hands. "I think it fell from the nest." The twins, now 11 years old, approached curiously. What before could have been an opportunity for cruelty disguised as play, transformed into a family project. Together they built a small padded box, researched on the internet about appropriate feeding, took turns in the care. "Let's call him Freedom," suggested Adam, observing the bird that was beginning to regain its strength, "because one day he'll fly again." The metaphor didn't go unnoticed by Emma, who observed the scene with a full heart. Everyone there had been in some way like that little bird, hurt, scared, unable to fly, and everyone was gradually recovering their wings. 6 months after. The turbulent night when Heather had reappeared, Richard proposed to Emma. It wasn't a grand or elaborate proposal. It happened in the kitchen, on an ordinary Sunday morning, while they prepared pancakes together. The children were the first to know, gathered around the breakfast table, still in their pajamas. "We want to officially form a family," announced Richard, holding Emma's hand. "What do you think about that?" The response came in the form of enthusiastic shouts and tight hugs. Later, when the adults left the kitchen, the 3 boys made their own secret pact, promising to always protect each other, never to let anything separate the family they had built together. The wedding was simple and intimate, held in the garden of the house where everything had begun. Ethan led Emma down the path of petals to the improvised altar, where Richard waited with the twins at his side, all in identical suits. There were no elaborate speeches or grand promises, just sincere words about second chances, about family chosen by love, not by obligation. Heather sent an extremely expensive flower arrangement with a congratulatory card. Richard considered returning it, but Emma suggested something different. They donated the flowers to the local children's hospital, transforming an empty gesture into something meaningful. When Emma discovered she was pregnant, a few months later, it was the boys who received the news with the most enthusiasm. They spent weeks debating names, redesigning the empty room next to Ethan's, creating elaborate stories about how the new member of the family would be. "Will it be a boy or a girl?" asked Ethan during dinner. "It doesn't matter," replied Aaron, with the wisdom of his almost 12 years. "It will be our brother or sister anyway. Our family isn't defined by blood," added Adam, surprising everyone with his perception. "It's defined by who chooses to stay." On the morning when the bird finally recovered completely, the 3 children gathered in the garden to release it. They observed in reverent silence as it tested its wings, hesitant at first, and then took flight with growing confidence, circling above them before disappearing into the blue sky. "Will it come back?" asked Ethan, with a hint of sadness. "Maybe," replied Aaron, putting his arm around his younger brother's shoulders. "But the important thing is that it's free to choose." That night, lying next to Richard with her hand resting on the small curve of her belly, where a new life was growing, Emma thought about choices and chances, about closed doors and open windows. She thought about the scared young woman she once was, pregnant and abandoned, struggling to survive among overdue bills and postponed dreams. She could never have imagined that a simple job advertisement would lead her not only to financial security, but to a complete family, to true love, to professional fulfillment. Life rarely follows the paths we plan, but sometimes it takes us exactly where we need to be. In the next room, Ethan slept peacefully, without more nightmares or fears of abandonment. In the rooms down the hall, the twins rested in peace, finally, free from the burden of distrust they had carried for so long. And there in that house that had once been cold and silent, now pulsated life, love, and the promise of even better days to come. The end of the story. Dear listeners, we hope that Emma's story and her journey to form a true family has touched your hearts. To continue this emotional journey, we've prepared a special playlist with equally moving stories. Find it here, clicking on the left. If you liked this narrative, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give a like to the video. Every day, we bring unique stories that explore the complexity of life.